What? What did you say?
What?
Did you just say trespasses?
Yes.
Unbelievable. Another one.
I said trespasses. What's the problem?
The problem is you are saying the Lord's Prayer the wrong way.
The wrong way?
Yes, you are wrong.
Okay, then what's the right way?
The right way is forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors.
It's the same thing. What's the difference? What's different from saying, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us? It means the same thing. Right, Pastor Drew?
No, wait. It does not mean the same thing. You can forgive a debt. A trespass? No. Trespass is a verb, for Pete's sake. You can forgive a crime, noun. You can forgive a mistake, also a noun. You can forgive people like Nicholas and Nicole for making bad movies, both nouns. And you can forgive a debt, noun.
It said right up there on that screen, trespasses. Or did you not notice?
My head was bowed, my hands were folded, my eyes were closed, I was praying.
There's someone here who can help us with this problem. Pastor Drew, what did Jesus say in the original Hebrew?
Jesus didn't speak Hebrew.
Of course he did. He was a Hebrew.
You trespassers are all so ignorant. Jesus was a Jew. He spoke Yiddish.
Now, we have to be fair about this. After all, the song does say, forgive us our debtors as we forgive our debts.
Ah, the people have spoken.
The people have not spoken. Another person has spoken. Maybe we should poll the congregation. I bet most of them would agree with me.
That does sound like a good idea. Hey, Pastor, take a poll of the congregation and see which one is right, debts or trespasses.
I like sin. I mean, I don't like sin. I like saying sin in the prayer. Oh, forget it.
In the message it says right here, keep us forgiven with you and forgiving of others.
Oh, now you're all speaking nonsense.
Speaking nonsense because we don't say...
Now I see why you don't say debts. You can't.
Honey, you say hollowed, as in empty.
That's it. I'm out of here. Who's with me? Come on. Anyone?
Bye. Well, hopefully you got that. Yeah, you can applaud that. Hopefully you picked up on that was an imaginary argument. I guess the microphones in people's hands probably gave it away. But, you know, as funny as that drama was, how many of you have been in arguments like that? And don't point fingers. Yeah. I'm sure that all of us have been in an argument like that at some point. You know, there were a lot of problems with that argument. You know, forget the pettiness of the conversation. And by the way, if you want to know my take on that debate, you can talk to me after the service. But it was a petty argument to begin with. But even if it wasn't that petty, the way that they were engaging each other was a problem. First of all, they were resorting to personal attacks. They were calling each other names. And beyond that, they were talking past each other. They were so busy defending their own point of view that they didn't stop to actually listen to what the other person was saying. And that kind of approach to handling conflict doesn't foster unity, but it leads to division. And division is a real problem in the church today. And that's incredibly tragic. And I'm not talking about Monticello United Methodist Church. I'm talking about the Universal Church, the capital C Church. Division is a real problem. And it's a tragedy, really, because that is not what Jesus envisioned for his church. If you take a look at his prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before he was crucified, this is what he prays. He says, I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, through to the disciples, that's you and me, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. What Jesus wanted for his church was unity, was that we be one, that we not be divided by our conflicts. Now, let's just be honest, though. Conflict is a reality when you get people in a community. Disagreements are going to happen. Disagreements happen within marriages and families and friendships. We shouldn't be surprised that conflict and disagreements can happen in the church. What makes the difference is how we handle the conflict. The church should be handling conflict differently than the world around us. We should have a different approach to handling conflict. And like I said, we're bound to have conflict over the interpretation of controversial passages of Scripture to the color of the carpet. There are going to be disagreements. And we need to know how to handle them. There is a Christian way to handle conflict. But it's really important that we preserve unity, because division among God's people is a problem. And it was something that was a problem with God's people a long time ago, too, in the time of the kingdom of Israel. If you've been reading along in the story, or if you heard Kelly's sermon last week, you know that King Solomon, sinned, and the consequence would be that the kingdom would be divided after his death. That's the upper story reason why the kingdom of Israel ended up divided. But there's a more direct, lower story reason that directly caused the division in Israel, and that is what I want to take a look at this morning. You see, Solomon had a son named Rehoboam. And right away after Solomon died, Rehoboam was anointed king by his own tribe of Judah. Remember, there were 12 tribes of Israel. Judah, Rehoboam's tribe, had him crowned king. Okay? So, the 10 northern tribes, the northern tribes of Israel, sent representatives to visit Rehoboam after he was crowned. And here's the thing that they wanted to address. Under Solomon's rule, Solomon had put those northern tribes under forced labor. He had made their lives difficult. He had placed a heavy burden on their shoulders. And what these representatives from the northern tribes came to do was make a request to Rehoboam now that he was king. And here's the request that they made. They said, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Right the wrongs that your father perpetrated. Relieve us of this injustice that we're suffering, and we will be loyal to you." Well, Rehoboam turns to his advisors, and he asks them what they think he should do. And so the older men, the ones who had been advisors to his father Solomon, say this: "If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." Their advice is, humble yourself. Show that you are going to be a servant of the people, and they will serve you. But then there were some younger men who had grown up with Rehoboam who gave him some different advice. They say, "These people have said to you, 'Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter.' Now tell them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will make it even heavier.' And he goes on to say, 'My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions.'" So that's what the young men advised. So one option give a gentle answer, one that shows that he understands their suffering and their plight, or a show of strength, a harsh answer, one that promotes his agenda over theirs? Which one do you think Rehoboam went with? Well, let's take a look. My father made your yoke heavy, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. He responded harshly. He didn't take into consideration what they suffered. He only took into consideration what he stood to lose if he looked weak. And what's the consequence of that? What do you think the northern tribes did? They went off and made somebody else their king. And from then on, the 10 northern tribes formed their own kingdom of Israel. If you're having trouble seeing that map, let me describe it to you. Down in the south, you have the tribes of Judah and Benjamin making up the southern kingdom of Judah, and you have the other 10 tribes making up the northern kingdom of Israel. From then on, the people of God would be forever divided. Israel and Judah would never come back together again. Those 12 tribes would never come back together again because of the division brought on by a harsh response. We can't make the same mistake that Rehoboam made. When we encounter conflict, we cannot respond harshly. We cannot respond by promoting our own agenda or our own perspective. That is not the way God would have us handle conflict. What I would like to share with you this morning is a description of what I believe God would have us do when faced with conflict. And the first and most important thing that we need to do when we're working through conflict is to seek to understand. The choir this morning sang the prayer of St. Francis, and there's this beautiful line in it that I love. And it says, "Grant that I may not so much seek to be understood as to understand." We need to seek to understand the other person's point of view. When we're in conflict with somebody, we have to try to see it through their eyes. We have to try to understand where they're coming from, understand their perspective. And some of the best advice that we see in the Bible on this subject we find in the book of James, written by Jesus' half-brother. In James, he writes, "Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak." If you're so busy promoting your own point of view, pushing your own agenda, making your own case, you are not going to hear the point of view of the other person. But I cannot underemphasize how important it is to try to see the issue or the situation through the other person's eyes. And this isn't easy, I know, but it is so essential in navigating through conflict because it accomplishes some things. First of all, it makes the other person feel heard and validated. It's a lot harder to be angry with somebody who is taking your point of view seriously. Somebody who is working to try to see things your way. It's a lot harder to be angry with somebody like that. Not to mention the fact that if you feel like they're listening to you, I think I messed that up. If they feel like you're listening to them, they will be more open to listening to you. So that's one thing that seeking to understand accomplishes. The other thing is you begin to hone in on what that other person values. What is most important to that other person? And so when you are working out some way to move forward, you know what is sacred to them. You know what is important to them. You know what they're afraid to lose, and you can help work out a solution that hopefully will not make them lose whatever they're afraid to lose. Because that's the source of a lot of conflict. When two people are in conflict, it's usually because both parties are afraid they're going to lose something, or at least one of the parties is afraid they're going to lose something. But if you zero in on what they're afraid to lose, what's so important to them, you can do your best to make sure that whatever the solution is, whatever conclusion you come to move forward, that what's important to them remains intact. So that's why it's so important to start by seeking to understand the other person's point of view. The next important step in working through conflict is to speak gently. Gentleness is a Christian virtue. It's one of my favorites because it's one that is so countercultural. It goes against everything that our society tells us. It's meekness, it's humility, it's timidity. It's not asserting yourself. It's not asserting your way over other people's. It's not being too sure of your own self-importance. Gentleness was described this way when I read an author describe gentleness this way. It's telling the truth, but expressing it in such a way that it's easier to accept, that it hurts as little as it possibly can. You're still telling the truth. You're still being honest, but you're saying it and communicating it in a way that it's easier to take. You know, if Rehoboam responded gently, he would have been following his own father's advice. Solomon did get something right. In Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1, Rehoboam's father writes, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." That was good advice if only Rehoboam had taken it. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Gentleness is choosing to communicate the truth in a way that is easier to take. Because when we're harsh, we get people's blood boiling. When we're harsh, we might disguise it under the motive of just being honest, just being truthful. Well, you know what? If it gets somebody's blood boiling, if it makes someone angry, they're not hearing your truth. They can't hear what you're saying through their anger. That is the danger when we respond to conflict with harshness. Gentleness is the essence of what Jesus and his disciples taught, to be honest with you. Love and gentleness are weapons that cut much deeper than a sword can. A sword stops a heart, gentleness softens a heart. Timidity, humility, meekness, gentleness. That is how we are to respond to conflict. You know, I may ruffle a few feathers when I say this next thing. We Christians are often very critical of political correctness. We don't like political correctness because we have this perception that it waters down the truth. But most of the time, if we're honest with ourselves, being politically correct just means being polite. It means choosing gentle words that don't rile up those with whom we disagree. It's about finding language we can agree on so that we can get down to the real issue and not use words that get everybody mad. Because again, when everybody's mad, when everybody's blood's boiling, nothing is being communicated. We are called to be peacemakers. We are called to calm situations, not heat them up. It is possible to speak truth without using language that gets people's blood boiling. That is the essence of speaking gently. And it should go without saying that name-calling and personal attacks are totally out of the question. speaking gently is important. No one's going to care what we have to say if we're saying it in a way that makes them angry. The last thing that we need to do when we're approaching and working through conflict is work towards consensus. And failing that, compromise. Consensus is the ideal. Consensus is where we have discussed and debated and revised our own opinions on things, and we've hashed it out until we can come to a conclusion that we agree upon. And it's different from a compromise because it's not one side giving in to the other necessarily. It means that we have discussed it to the point that I've changed my mind about some things, you've changed your mind about some things, and we've ultimately arrived at an agreement that this is what it should be. That's consensus. And it's hard. But it's ideal because compromise, somebody's going to consider themselves the loser. In consensus, nobody's the loser because we've all won. Compromise, on the other hand, is what we have to settle for when we can't achieve consensus. It's when we have to say, okay, on some things we'll have to agree to disagree, but this is how we'll move forward. That's compromise. Now, compromise to Christians, to us Christians, can be a dirty word, and that's because we have some non-negotiables. We have certain beliefs that if you take them out of the equation, you don't have Christianity anymore. And we're afraid of compromising those things, and rightfully so. We shouldn't compromise those essentials. But I think all too often we take non-essentials, we take peripheral debatable issues and turn them into non-negotiables. When we are working towards consensus and compromise, we need to make sure that we pay attention to what we are classifying as essential and non-essential. What are we considering negotiable and non-negotiable? Do we have reason to consider those things non-negotiable? And we have to be honest with ourselves. There is no reason to hang on to a debatable, negotiable, non-essential thing if it's a choice between holding on to that non-essential and being united. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, said this. He said, after defining what he believed were the essentials, were the non-negotiables, he said, but as to all opinions which do not strike at the root of Christianity, we think and let think. If you need a more biblical authority, which is fine, let me share these words of Paul. In the context of conflict in the early church, one that I think is a peripheral and non-essential one, over whether or not Christians should eat food sacrificed to idols, Paul says this, except the ones whose faith is weak without quarreling over disputable matters. We need to know the difference between what is at the heart of Christianity, what is the non-essential, what is the non-negotiable, or what is the non-negotiable. And we need to, on the peripheral, debatable, non-essential things, be willing to give room to disagree. So, that is my advice, and I believe it's biblical advice for dealing with conflict. This is how we are supposed to be different from the world around us when addressing conflict. Seek to understand the other person's point of view. Speak gently rather than harshly. And ultimately make your goal consensus, or failing that, compromise. That is how we are to approach conflict as Christians. Because that is the only way we can preserve unity which is something beautiful, even sacred, and avoid the tragedy of division. In the words of Solomon, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. May your approach to conflict be characterized not by harshness, but by gentleness.